Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Wynn, and this presentation will focus on my critique of the article titled Imaginary Companions and Young Children's Coping Incompetence, written by Tracy Gleason and Maria Calpita. I will be providing a brief overview of the research, highlighting significant findings, sharing key insights from my critique, and discussing two practical applications of the study. This topic is especially relevant in developmental psychology because it examines how imaginative play, something almost every child engages in, might contribute to emotional and social growth. The study's focus on imaginary companions provides a window into how early imaginative relationships can reflect and perhaps even shape children's real-world coping skills and self-concept. In the study, the researchers aimed to investigate whether imaginary companions influence the development of coping skills and competence in early childhood. They sought to improve upon prior studies that were limited by methodological flaws or had a narrow clinical focus, where imaginary companions were often viewed as pathological rather than normal developmental tools. Their central hypothesis was that children with imaginary companions would demonstrate more adaptive coping behaviors, such as constructive problem solving and emotional regulation, compared to their peers without imaginary companions. Essentially, the study explores whether the presence of an imaginary friend reflects advanced social understanding and self-regulation, or whether it's simply a byproduct of imagination without broader developmental effects. In the study, we had 72 typically developing preschool-aged children, nearly balanced by gender, with there being 37 boys and 35 girls. The children ranged from 3 to 6 years old, with an average of just over 4 years. Most participants came from white middle-class families with college-educated parents, which reflects a fairly homogeneous and socioeconomically stable group. This demographic consistency makes for clean data collection, but it limits generalizability to children from more diverse cultural, racial, or economic backgrounds, who may have very different socialization patterns or stressors that influence coping and imagination. It's also worth noting that most families were intact, and nearly half of the children were firstborn or only children. Previous research suggests that firstborns and only children may be more likely to create imaginary companions, possibly as a substitute for sibling interactions or to practice social skills. The study was a correlational study, meaning the researchers examined relationships between the variables rather than manipulating them experimentally. The independent variables included whether or not children had an imaginary companion, what type it was, an invisible friend or personified object, such as a stuffed animal, and the quality of their relationship, which could either be egalitarian or hierarchical. Egalitarian relationships suggest mutual play and cooperation, while hierarchical ones indicate control or nurturance by the child. The dependent variables focused on two domains, coping and competence. Coping was measured through both hypothetical and puppet scenarios and standardized parent questionnaires that assessed how children managed frustration or conflict. Competence was measured through the pictorial scale of perceived competence and social acceptance, which was completed by mothers, teachers, and the children themselves. This multi-informant approach, combining self-parent and teacher perspectives, strengthens the study by capturing both behavioral outcomes and adult perceptions of the child's abilities. Contrary to the researchers' original hypothesis, simply having an imaginary companion did not predict superior coping strategies. Children with and without imaginary companions use similar methods for dealing with frustration or social conflict. However, the quality of child imaginary companion relationship played a crucial role. Children with egalitarian imaginary companions engaged in more problem-focused coping, meaning they were more likely to find constructive solutions, negotiate, or seek social support. These children were also rated as friendlier and more cooperative in conflict situations. In contrast, those with hierarchical companions relationships where the child assumes a dominant or caregiving role did not show the same adaptive benefits. This suggests that equality and reciprocity in imaginary play may mirror or reinforce real-world social competence and empathy. The competence results revealed an interesting split between adult perspectives. Mothers perceived children with imaginary companions as more cognitively competent, perhaps viewing imaginative play as a sign of creativity and advanced reasoning. Teachers, however, identified higher social competence, particularly among children with egalitarian imaginary companions, describing them as more cooperative, pro-social, and engaged with peers. Meanwhile, the children's self-ratings showed little variation, which aligns with existing developmental research. Young children tend to view themselves positively across most domains, regardless of actual performance. Overall, these findings highlight that imaginary companionship may reflect children's developing ability to understand social roles, navigate relationships, and imagine perspectives beyond their own, which are all key milestones in socio-emotional development. There are notable limitations in the study. The homogeneity of the sample, as mentioned earlier, limits how well these results apply to broader populations. Different cultures, for example, vary in how they view imagination and play. Some might encourage fantasy play more than others. The narrow age range, focusing on only 3 to 6-year-olds, prevents generalization to older children whose imaginary companions might serve different psychological purposes, such as managing complex emotions or peer conflicts. Finally, the heavy reliance on maternal reports introduces potential bias. Mothers may over or underreport their children's imaginary interactions, depending on their beliefs about imagination and normal development. Including direct interviews with children could have provided richer firsthand insight into how they perceive and use their companions. My critique emphasized two major insights. First, the quality of the relationship with an imaginary companion, whether egalitarian or hierarchical, is a stronger predictor of coping and competence outcomes than merely having an imaginary friend. This distinction parallels real-life relationships where mutual respect and shared problem-solving foster social emotional growth. Second, adults' perceptions differed in meaningful ways. Parents tended to associate imaginary companionship with intelligence and creativity, while teachers linked it to social understanding and cooperation. This difference underscores how context matters. Parents see their child privately, while teachers observe them navigating peer interactions, giving them a clear window into social functioning. The findings from the study have several valuable applications. In educational settings, recognizing imaginary companions as tools for practicing social skills can help ease children's transition into structured environments, such as preschool and kindergarten. Teachers can support these imaginative relationships by encouraging cooperative play, perspective taking, and empathy. These practices can lead to stronger peer relationships, emotional self-regulation, and smoother adaptation to classroom routines. In therapeutic settings, clinicians and child psychologists can use imaginary companion-related play as a therapeutic tool. Guided imaginative play can help children express emotions safely, practice coping skills, and externalize inner conflicts. This approach is particularly effective for children who struggle with anxiety, adjustment, or social withdrawal. Finally, for parents, understanding that imaginary companions are not signs of maladjustment, but healthy creative outlets can help them nurture rather than suppress their child's imaginative world. In summary, imaginary companions are a normative and even beneficial part of early childhood development. Their impact depends way less on whether they exist and more on the quality of the imagined relationship. Egalitarian imaginary companions, in particular, appear to support prosocial coping, empathy, and cognitive flexibility. The findings contribute to a broader understanding of how imagination interacts with emotional development, bridging the gap between fantasy and real-world social functioning. When educators, clinicians, and parents view imaginative play as a developmental strength rather than an oddity, they open doors for more supportive and creative child developmental practices. This concludes my presentation. Here are the APA style references for both the article and the textbook where it was cited. Thank you for watching, and I hope this presentation provided a clearer understanding of how imaginary companions can serve as powerful mirrors of children's social and emotional worlds.